A woman asked if the others had left yet. It was 2:17 a.m., the kind of hour that feels paused between breaths. The gas station sat alone at the edge of the highway, fluorescent canopy lights humming over 4 empty pumps. Beyond the concrete, the road dissolved into black fields and distant tree lines that looked like torn paper against the sky. Inside, the store smelled faintly of burnt coffee and disinfectant. The air conditioner rattled in its wall unit, pushing out air that was a degree too cold, so that the backs of my hands felt dry and tight. The drink coolers along the rear wall cast a steady blue glow across the tile floor. Every few seconds, one of them clicked as its compressor cycled on, a mechanical exhale. I had been alone for hours. When the door chimed, it startled me more than it should have. The woman stepped in slowly, as if testing the floor. The bell above the door gave its usual 2-note ring, but the echo seemed to lag a fraction behind, like it had to travel farther than the room allowed. She paused just inside, letting the door swing shut behind her. She was neither young nor old. Her coat hung loosely, the fabric slightly damp at the hem, though it hadn't rained. Her hair was pinned back in a way that felt careful, deliberate. She didn't look at the shelves or the coffee station. She looked at me. Her voice was soft, almost conversational. "Have the others left yet?" For a moment, I thought she must have mistaken the place for somewhere else. We didn't get groups at this hour, no truckers tonight, no teenagers lingering around the chips. Just me, the security cameras, and the hum of the lights. "There's no one here," I said, gesturing vaguely at the empty aisles. Her eyes drifted past me, scanning the store, not in the way customers do, searching for products. She was counting, measuring. "Oh," she said, "that's good." The way she said it didn't sound relieved. It sounded like confirmation. She began to walk down the first aisle, her shoes making almost no sound against the tile. The overhead lights flickered, not fully, just a brief stutter, like a skipped frame in a film. The freezers at the back hummed louder, then softer, then settled again. I watched her on the monitor mounted above the register. The cameras were old, slightly grainy, but reliable. On screen, she moved slowly past the candy bars and motor oil, her head tilting as if listening. For a moment I saw something else. Behind her, between the shelves, a distortion, like heat shimmer. The image wavered. I leaned closer to the screen. There was nothing there. When I looked up from the monitor, she was at the end of the aisle, staring directly at the camera. Her mouth curved, not a smile exactly, but something close. Cleared my throat. "Are you looking for anything?" She turned her head slightly, as if the question had come from far away. "I just needed to be sure," she said. "They don't like when I overlap with them." A cold prickle crept up my arms. "Overlap?" She didn't answer. Instead, she moved toward the refrigerators, their glass doors reflecting the store in pale blue layers. As she passed, I noticed her reflection lagged half a step behind her body. It was subtle, bling can you'll miss it subtle, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Her hand hovered over a freezer door handle but didn't touch it. The glass fogged faintly where her breath met it, though she stood inches away, not close enough to warm the surface. In the reflection, there were shapes behind her. Not defined shapes, just vertical smudges, darker than the surrounding blue. They seemed to stretch upward, taller than her, tapering toward the ceiling. I blinked. Gone. The door chimed again. I flinched and glanced toward the entrance. No one stood there. The glass door was closed, unmoving. The bell swayed gently, as if it had just been struck. The woman's head snapped toward the sound. "They're late," she murmured. A tremor ran through my stomach. "Who is?" She didn't look at me this time. She was staring at the door. "The others," she said, as though reminding me. The lights flickered again, longer this time. The store dimmed to a dull, greenish hue before snapping back to fluorescent white. In that fraction of darkness, I heard something shift, like fabric dragged across tile. A whisper of movement between aisles. I stepped out from behind the counter before I realized I was moving. "Ma'am," I said, my voice thinner than I intended. If there's someone with you, they need to. The words caught in my throat. There was someone standing at the end of the third aisle. Tall. Too tall for the space, its head nearly brushing the hanging promotional signs. It was turned slightly sideways so I couldn't see its face, if it had one. Its body seemed wrapped in shadow that didn't match the overhead lighting. I blinked hard. The aisle was empty. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the hum of the refrigerators. I became aware of how quiet the store was otherwise. No cars passing on the highway. No wind against the windows. Even the air conditioner had stopped. The woman turned to me slowly. "They don't like being noticed," she said. Her voice carried strangely now, as if layered with another tone beneath it. A faint echo that didn't belong to the shape of her mouth. "I don't see anyone," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was convincing her or myself. Her eyes softened in something like pity. "They're not here for you," she said. "Not yet." A soft knock sounded against the glass door. 3 taps. I stared at it. No one stood outside. The parking lot was empty, bathed in steady white light. Beyond that, the darkness pressed close. Another 3 taps. This time, the glass bowed inward slightly, as if something leaned against it from the outside. The bell above the door trembled but did not ring. The woman stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell her coat. Cold air and something metallic, like old coins. "You shouldn't answer," she said. "I'm not," I replied, though my feet felt rooted in place. The knock came again, louder. The security monitor above us flickered, its image splitting briefly into overlapping frames. In one of them, the store was full. Figures stood in every aisle, tall, thin silhouettes facing the counter. Their heads tilted at identical angles. Their edges bled into the fluorescent light, blurring and reforming. Then the image snapped back to empty shelves. I gasped. "They wait," the woman said. "They prefer when you invite them." "I didn't invite anyone," I said. Her gaze shifted past me, to the space just over my shoulder. A breath brushed the back of my neck. I spun around. Nothing. But the air felt crowded, thick, as if the room's dimensions had subtly shrunk. The shadows between shelves seemed deeper now, stretching farther than the lights should allow. The door handle began to turn. Slowly. Metal grinding against metal. The bell gave a thin, strangled ring as the door opened a crack. Cold night air slipped inside, carrying the scent of asphalt and something older, damp and earthen. No one stood in the doorway, yet the door continued to open. The woman watched, her expression unreadable. "I asked if they had left," she said quietly. "I needed to know if it was safe." "For who?" I asked. Her eyes met mine fully for the first time. "For me," she said. "Or for you." The lights went out. Total darkness swallowed the store, broken only by the faint blue glow of the refrigerators. In that dim light, I saw them clearly, not with my eyes exactly, but with the pressure in the room. Shapes, many of them. They stood between the aisles, behind the counter, near the door. Not moving, not breathing. Waiting. The woman stepped backward, her outline thinning, blending with the blue light. "You see them now," she said, her voice layered with a dozen softer tones. "That means they see you." The power surged back on. The store was empty. The door was closed. The bell still. I stood alone behind the counter, heart hammering. On the security monitor, the timestamp flickered and reset to 2:17 a.m. Over and over. The door chimed. I looked up. A figure stood just inside, silhouetted by the canopy lights. I couldn't make out its features. Tilted its head. In a voice that sounded almost like mine, it asked, "Have the others left yet?" The store's lights went out, but the shadows stayed. It happened without drama. No pop, no shower of sparks. 1 second the fluorescent panels buzzed overhead, humming in their thin electric way, and the next they went dead, leaving the convenience store in a silence so complete it felt padded. But the shadows didn't vanish with the light. They remained exactly where they'd been, long bars stretching from the shelves, a dark wedge beneath the coffee machine, the thin outline of the display rack by the door, as if the light had been an accessory, and the shadows the true occupants. For a moment I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, clinging to afterimages. I blinked hard. The shapes didn't fade. Outside, the gas station canopy still glowed, its white light bleeding through the front windows. The pumps stood in their quiet islands of illumination, surrounded by darkness that swallowed the highway. I could see the road stretching out, empty in both directions. No passing headlights, no distant taillights, just the low hiss of wind skimming asphalt. Inside, though, the store should have been pitch black. Instead, it was dimly defined. The refrigerators along the back wall cast a faint blue glow, but it wasn't strong enough to carve such crisp darkness across the floor. The shadows were too solid, too deliberate. The hum of the coolers continued for a few seconds, then cut off mid-cycle. The silence that followed felt layered, like a presence pressing down on the air. I stepped out from behind the counter slowly. The tile floor was cold even through my shoes. Somewhere in the building, metal ticked as it cooled. The faint smell of burnt coffee lingered near the self-serve station. "Power's out," I muttered to myself, as if naming it would make it ordinary. My voice didn't carry the way it should have. It felt swallowed, absorbed before it reached the shelves. I glanced at the breaker panel near the back hallway. The red exit sign still glowed dimly. Emergency power, I assumed. But the shadows didn't match the emergency lighting. They were deeper than they should be, stretching at angles that didn't correspond to any visible source. One ran along the aisle to my right, long and narrow, as if cast by a tall person standing just out of view. I turned toward aisle 3. Nothing stood there. The shelf labels were faintly visible in the blue light. Chips and candy bars formed low, uneven silhouettes. The shadow between them thickened. I took a step closer. The darkness retreated half an inch. Not much, just enough that I noticed. I stopped moving. The shadow held its position. The air conditioning, which had been rattling steadily all night, was dead now. Without it, the store's air felt heavy, stale. My own breathing sounded intrusive. I walked to the front window and peered out at the canopy. The pumps were still illuminated. That meant the power hadn't failed entirely. Just the interior, or just this part of it. I tried the light switch behind the counter. Clicked uselessly. When I turned back around, the shadows had shifted. The one beneath the coffee station had spread outward, pooling across the tile like spilled ink. The edges weren't soft. They were sharp, defined. Too defined. I crouched slightly, studying the base of the machine. There was no object large enough to cast that shape. The thought slid into my mind slowly, like a splinter. They aren't being cast. They're standing. I straightened, pulse tightening in my throat. The refrigerator doors reflected the interior faintly, ghosted and warped. In their glass, I saw the store repeated in layers. And in one of those layers, deeper, darker, the aisles were full. Figures stood shoulder to shoulder between the shelves. Their forms were thin, elongated, indistinct. They didn't move. They didn't breathe. They simply occupied. I spun around. The store was empty, but the shadows were thicker now. The long one in aisle 3 extended almost to my feet. I stepped back instinctively. It extended with me. A cold prickle crawled across my scalp. "It's just your eyes," I whispered. The words felt foolish as soon as I said them. There was a rhythm to the darkness, a subtle pulsing, like something adjusting its weight. The longer I looked, the more I noticed slight separations within it. Darker seams branching off the main shapes, like fingers. I remembered something my grandmother once said years ago when the power went out during a storm. Shadows don't disappear when the light does. They just go somewhere else. I hadn't understood what she meant then. I thought she was being poetic. Now I wasn't so sure. A soft scuff echoed from the back hallway. I froze. "Hello," I called out before I could stop myself. No answer. The scuff came again, closer this time. Not a footstep exactly. More like fabric dragged across tile. The shadow at the end of the hallway thickened. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. It leaned slightly into the main store area, as if testing the boundary. My mouth felt dry. I edged toward the counter, needing the small illusion of barrier it provided. As I moved, the shadows adjusted. They didn't lunge. They didn't dart. They deepened. The one beneath the register rose along the front panel, climbing in a smooth gradient that shouldn't have been possible without a light source behind me. But there was no light behind me. The only illumination came from the faint blue of the refrigerators and the distant canopy outside. Yet the shadow rose like a tide. The store felt smaller now, the walls subtly closer, the ceiling lower. The silence pressed against my ears until I could hear my own pulse, a dull thud that seemed too loud. In the refrigerator glass, the layered reflection shifted again. The deeper image, the one with the figures, moved. Not abruptly. One by one, their heads tilted toward me. The movement was synchronized, slow and deliberate. In the real store, the shadows leaned, just slightly, as if acknowledging that I had finally noticed. A realization settled over me with awful clarity. These weren't random distortions. They weren't tricks of failing lights. They were residual, impressions left behind by something that had once occupied this space. Every customer who had ever stood in these aisles, every late-night wanderer, every tired trucker, every silent stranger who had lingered too long, their outlines had stayed, accumulated, and now, without the harsh fluorescent lights to keep them pinned to the floor, they were free to stretch, to remember their shapes. The shadow in the hallway detached fully from the wall. It didn't step forward. It unfolded, long and vertical, peeling itself from the surface like a second skin. The others followed. Along the aisles, beneath the shelves, beside the drink coolers, darkness lifted and elongated, forming the suggestion of bodies. They weren't solid, but they weren't flat either. They occupied depth. The air grew colder. My breath fogged faintly in front of me. I backed into the counter, fingers gripping the edge. "I'm still here," I said, unsure why I was speaking. "The store's still open." The words felt like a claim, or a plea. The shadows paused. The refrigerator hum flickered weakly, then died entirely. Now there was no sound at all, not even wind outside. The canopy lights flickered through the window, and for a fraction of a second, the store interior brightened. In that flash, I saw them clearly, not as reflections, not as suggestions, but as standing forms between the shelves. Dozens of them, facing me. Then the canopy lights steadied, and they were gone again, collapsed into layered darkness. But closer, much closer. The shadow at my feet touched the toe of my shoe. It didn't feel like contact. It felt like recognition. The lights did not come back on. The emergency glow faded gradually until even the exit sign went dark. Yet I could still see the shapes around me, because they weren't dependent on light. They were dependent on me, on my outline, on the way I occupied space. As my eyes adjusted, I realized something else. There was one shadow in the store that didn't move with the others. One that remained fixed behind the counter. My shadow. Except, I lifted my hand slowly. The shadow behind the counter did not. It stayed perfectly still, facing forward, as if waiting for its turn.